at some point you want to turn the camera so I can see the audience? That would be nice. Yeah, I'm sorry I can't be there today. It really is a privilege to be able to talk to some of the people who are helping to push forward what some consider to be the inevitable human future. My job as a contrarian is to, whenever I'm talking to the public, speak up about these possibilities. But just as Werner is bored being a member of a, group that emphasizes positive all the time, and he speaks of possible downsides, so do I. And about a year ago, I spoke at the Singularity conference in New York about a topic that I think I'd like to elaborate a little more about today, and that is, what is your biggest job? What is your biggest worry? What is the thing you need to check off above all? Now, there's context to all of this. How do we keep Moore's law going, for example? There are a lot of technological aspects to that. There's the whole question of how you build AI. And there's a dozen theories for that. Everybody has their own, and whether it's going to emerge out of models of the brain, out of models of the mind, out of pragmatic efforts like Google Car combining with Watson. There are worries that that's how Terminator's Skynet might emerge as an emergent property without our having designed it. And I've been online pointing out something very scary, and that is that the military would not be the source of such a rogue program. Such a program could become quasi-sapient and then reach out and grab whatever it needed, say, for instance, the software for pattern recognition, the Google Car, and for expert systems analysis from Watson, IBM Watson, and then suddenly become intelligent without our knowing it. And in my opinion, the place where this could happen most likely is the place where the most money is being poured into artificial intelligence in utter secrecy. And that's high-frequency stock trading programs, which you can look up online what I've had to say about them. I think they're just about the most dangerous things on the planet because they are programmed pathologically to have only one motive, and that's to be utterly predatory. If these are the ones that reach out and grab all the parts they need and then become intelligent, well, I, for one, welcome our new overlords. There are a lot of aspects to this, like, for instance, whether or not we're going to be able to go along for the ride. There are flaws in extrapolation, for example, whether or not it turns out that the synapse and the connectome is not enough to be able to analyze any human brain and the mind that's affiliated with it. We tend to assume, because of our image of the synapse as being somehow correlated with the computer flip-flop, that that's what's going to happen, but it's not necessarily so. For one thing, the synapse is extremely nonlinear and can go in multiple directions and dimensions, which helps to make the whole process smart. But in addition, there's the possibility growing on the horizon of intracellular computing, the possibility that some computational elements take place within the cells, and not just within the neurons, but the supporting glial and astrocyte cells. If this is the case, then it changes all of our Moore's law predictions for intersecting with the human ability, and it makes us seem even more awesome. There's some of the things that John Smart is working on with his partners, where we might be able to get much cheaper brain preservation. Instead of using up Earth resources and energy, keeping liquid nitrogen flowing, we might be able to just plasticize the whole thing, put it on the mantelpiece with some AI in the base that keeps saying, hey, it's getting dusty over here. Making an image of yourself or giving advice. Then we get to the Fermi Paradox, which is, I think, the crux that we lean, that it's the ghost at the banquet, which says to us, well, what's what's all this about? There are two major ghosts that always show up nowadays for the last 10 years. And I've written both nonfiction and short stories about these, as has your next speaker, the great Kim Stanley Robinson. And that is, are we in a simulation? Which Jan Tallinn spoke about very effectively last year. But also, where is everybody? Where are the aliens? Now, these two interact with each other in some very interesting ways, and ways that are very disturbing, and that have given a lot of intellectual heft and meat for the last several years. And the discussions continue online. For instance, Stan's new novel, 2312, and in my new novel, Existence. And the whole question of how we can make it a good singularity as against a bad one. But this is a very short talk, so I need to emphasize what I emphasized in October of 2010 in New York, and that is, your number one job is not to thrash out any of those things, or to keep talking to each other in a self-referential internal community. At that talk, I showed a slide showing Giordano Bruno burning at the stake in the Campo di Fiorno in the early 1600s. That is what you have to have on your desktop as your wallpaper on the wall of your office, because that's what could happen. Now, we just had an election in which the reality-based community and the side that, unfortunately, it's a matter of simplistic sides, and it shouldn't be. It wouldn't be if we still had Barry Goldwater around. But unfortunately, right now, it's a case of one side in the American mimic set has gone crazy and abandoned all of its old conservative principles and has become, let itself be talked into anti-science. Well, it represents a mimic spread of a notion that we should have expected, and that is renunciationism. It was pushed by Michael Crichton in all of his films. I portray a character based largely on Michael Crichton in my latest novel, who is involved in this renunciation movement that wants to control the onward rush of science and technology and the onward rush toward this new era. And it's very worrisome. It could, in its extrapolated form, if people continue to be terrified, and if cynical masters of propaganda continue to milk their terror, it could lead us down the path that the early singularitarian Giordano Bruno ran into, largely because he ignored the ability of the public to misinterpret, and the powers that be in the church to deliberately and willfully misinterpret what he was saying. He poked for the fun of it, for the fun of feeling superior over your neighbors. And in that discussion in October 2010, and you can look it up, it's a YouTube video, I had some fun, it was popular, pointing out that it is possible for you, the brainy ones, to learn to talk to your neighbors who are afraid. And one of the best methods is to show them that there are clear interpretations in Scripture, in the Bible, that can be taken in a singularitarian context. And the best of them all, if you study it, is the story of the Tower of Babel, in which it turns out that there's no anger at all. There's no anger at all. This is a guy who was burning cities with fire and brimstone, drowning whole planets. And yet all he did was confuse us, set us out to wander the earth in confusion, unable to understand each other, and to have to work hard to redevelop the ability to communicate with each other amid diversity. Right there in the Tower of Babel story is the statement, if they keep doing this kind of thing, nothing will be beyond them. It is a clear, inarguable statement right there in the Bible that we were designed to be capable of being gods, of being co-creators. And if you talk to people about that sort of thing, you show them David Orban's work with his comrades on the ability to put captions under everything so that never again will language keep us apart, then it becomes clear that we're rebuilding that tower right now. It's flat, it covers the globe, it's high, it covers the universe. And either he is going to meddle with us again and scatter us again, so because we have more lessons. And this could happen because it happened to the Periclean experiment. It happened to other great enlightenments. We could do it to ourselves. Or, now's the time. Now's the time. And that's what you guys are. The Tower of Babel, you should read it dozens of times. It should be a symbol. It should be part of your wall paint. Because it's what we're doing. And if you show that you're scholarly, that you're willing to reach out, here's what's happened with me. I have engaged some of these Book of Revelations junkies, these fundamentalists out there, and I've talked to them about what I talked to you about, and the meaning of the expulsion from Eden and all that. And I undermine this Book of Revelations horror that they're obsessed with. And it turns out that they don't get mad. They become more friendly because I tried to reach to them. And it is your job as the smart guys, to be able to handle this politically and psychologically, to be able to say to your neighbors, I read your book, I understand it, perhaps better than you, but I'm not going to insult you. But I and I can convince you not to burn us at the stake, but instead to do what Arnold Toynbee recommended for all civilizations, to make it through their crises. And that's to trust the creative minority and not abuse or abandon it. Because those civilizations that abandoned their creative minority, they were the ones who failed. Read Toynbee. Read Jared Diamond's Collapse. But it's a brilliant book, and it should be cautionary for us all, but he draws the wrong conclusions. Toynbee draws the right ones. And I think I've pushed your patience. I've run out of time. If there's any time, I'm happy to take questions, but if you could turn the camera around so I can see the audience, that would be nice.
Thank you, David. Lovely having you here virtually. I think we do have a couple of minutes.
Fred, how many minutes do we have?
As I said,
How many?
most of what I have to say
2
about
minutes.
this is there in my existence.
9:48.
Tilt it down a little. Can you tilt it down?
Yeah.
There we are.
Yeah.
Oh, a nice big group. A handsome group. There you go. Is Stan Robinson out there?
Yes,
Yes.
he is. In the corner over
In
there.
the corner.
Hi, Stan. All right, so anybody have any questions about what I have to raise? I merely covered the entire scope and span of our destiny.
Questions?
Or
Yes, please.
professions.
Okay.
Speak
Yeah,
up.
the whole Fermi
Please
Paradox
stand up and
We're,
speak as loudly, or come up here and speak to the mic.
Just
The
speak
whole
loud.
Fermi Paradox thing
okay.
is part of this whole discussion of whether we should shout into the cosmos. And that's called METI, M-E-T-I. And if you
Testing 1,
search
2.
David Brin and METI, you'll find some interesting discussion of that.
Hey, Dave. Okay, we do have some questions from the audience. I'm going to pass the mic. Just a moment, please. Why don't you stand over here so he can see you?
Sure.
Just look for Elijah.
Thank you. Here we go.
Okay. Well, you mentioned that one political side in particular is sort of anti-science, I think that both liberals and conservatives have their own sort of own anti-science. You might say traditions. for example, I mean, we all know that conservatives are on balance anti-evolution and so on and so forth. But to just use one example that's relevant to transhumanism, the embryo screening. Traits such as intelligence and happiness are largely genetic, and therefore mainly improving the genetic quality of the population through embryo screening is one of the better ways to raise quality of life. I think that both political parties would be opposed to that inference, but I think it would be liberals who would raise the loudest, who would object the most to it.
That's very, very intelligent, and let me answer that. First off, I've long despised the so-called left-right political spectrum, which we should abandon because it's lobotomizing, because nobody can define it, but above all, because it's French. Now, if you are forced to use that crippling metaphor, then really there are 4 or 5 of it. There's the extreme left, which shares an anti-engineering, which is why, even though they are all in favor of the science of dealing with climate change, they put down their foot and they scream bloody murder over any preliminary experiments having to do with geoengineering. And there they are wrong, because we need a plan B. And then you have the far right, so to speak, that is just absolutely screaming, troglodyte. The difference between the Democratic and Republican parties is that one has allowed its extremists to take it over, and the other has not. But sure, I am extremely wary of the far left, and I poke at them all the time, but that's not the issue here. The issue here is, can we develop back to being a pragmatic, problem-solving civilization? And clearly, one political wing is at least willing to talk about that. And so that's where we have to lean guardedly on this. Now, when you get to the whole embryo thing, I suggest you read Robert Heinlein's Beyond This Horizon. It's his prescriptive utopia, and by far one of his best philosophical books, in which the second half, in which he talks, is more interesting than the action-packed first half. And it deals with this whole issue of how we can do eugenics without raising the fear and the reflex that the left is responding to, and that is the whole Nazi thing. And we do have to learn from the whole Nazi thing. We do have to have it be our reflex to all else being equal. Put the burden of proof on anybody who wants to go back into territory to go to. I think that the reflex is too strong. Another, anybody, do we have another?
Yes, we do.
Is anybody
Peter Roth has a
downloading
question.
anything?
Yeah,
Just
don't
a moment.
download, don't stream.
Hi, David. I don't know if you can see this book here, but you were just mentioning the Tower of Babel moment, and there's this book out, it's called Transhumanism, a grimoire of alchemical agendas by Dr. Joseph Farrell and Dr. Scott D. Hart. I haven't researched their background or whatever, but they actually are taking that story and turning it into a sort of a hermetic occult conspiracy theory. And so I haven't finished the book. So at the risk of critiquing it before I finish the book, is taking that exact theme and trying to turn it into a scary thing.
Exactly, and so what we need to do is we need to look at the metaphors that the troglodytes are using against us and see if there's a chance to do jujitsu. Not enough people study the notion of jujitsu. A far more important book by a far more important scholar that we should study is Our Transhumanist Post-Human Future by Fukuyama, who is down the road from you guys. Francis Fukuyama at Stanford. I've met him. He's very, very smart, almost always wrong. If we can learn how to engage people, both of these kinds of enemies. I engaged Fukuyama one day and got him shifted a little bit. You can do the same thing, not with the authors of that transhumanism book, but with some of their readers, by showing some joy in using their momentum against them. Because they have to reach harder to turn the story of Babel into a bad story, into a story of wrath and anger. When in fact there's no wrath, there's no anger. It's just a tweaking, a fine-tuning that resulted in 4,000 years of human pain. But that brings up another issue I want to raise. And that is, both religion and transhumanism share this same notion. And I'm not talking about redemption and being downloaded by some future, our heirs downloading us into paradise, as opposed to God downloading us into paradise. I'm not talking about that parallel. I'm talking about the parallel of personal redemption, where we have a tendency to be solipsistic and think that it's all about me. Now you're looking at a fellow who has a very, very healthy, large ego. And in here, it's all spread over a larger surface area. But when you work it all out, and you take into account human psychology, really, I don't matter. I really don't. And whether or not all my efforts here on Earth to help bring about a positive singularity, and to be interesting, make me worthy of resurrection in some simulation, in my opinion, that reward is secondary. It's tertiary. To me, it comes down to one thing, and that is the project, us. We may be, as I talk about in my novel, we may be the only hope for the galaxy because there's strong, I've cataloged 100 explanations for the Fermi Paradox. That's my job. And there are strong reasons to believe that we're the leapfroggers. We're the extremely anomalously smart ones. And the galaxy is waiting for us. And us is what matters. And you can get the moral high ground over the religious solipsists by pointing out that all they care about is their individual soul, and they're selfish. Whereas we're trying, whether or not we ever get downloaded, or whether or not we ever get simulated, we're the ones who are talking about us.
And on that note, David Orban has a question for you, and then we're going to close with Kim speaking to you briefly. So,
David Orban,
Hello, David.
the man who's making it possible to rebuild the Tower of Babel.
Absolutely, trying hard. The new atheists have certainly stirred the pot, and they abysmally failed to engage the other side, maybe even contributed to make them more extreme. And I am guilty of that, defining myself a missionary atheist. And I take your advice very seriously of making sure that we find smart ways to bring them slowly on our side rather than inimicating them.
Or at least not willing to burn us.
At least, yes. And you gave a great example as far as Christianity is concerned. What is your prescription in engaging in fruitful discussions? Islam, which was pro-science a few hundred years ago, and it is definitely not today.
Well, you have a problem right now that the Wahhabis are taking over the madrasas and the schools, Islamic schools all over the world, through the money that we give them for oil. And that is one reason to deal with tuoda, things we ought to be doing anyway. And that is, can you guys still hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
yes.
Tuoda is things we ought to be doing anyway. That's the ultimate answer to all of the climate denialists, is there's so many things that could deal with climate change that we ought to be doing anyway to take us off the Saudi teat and enable us to talk to the moderates in Islam and say to them, you used to be scientific, we would welcome you, but to reclaim this heritage, and we thank you for it. But we'll help you to reclaim this heritage if you let your girls come along.
And on that note, we have a special friend to say hello to you.
Hi, David. It's my happy task to say thank you and goodbye for the whole group.
Yes, Stan, I'm in here.
It looks like you're in your beautiful office in San Diego, and I hope you have a nicer day than we do. And thanks again. I look forward to when we next cross paths, which will be typically sooner rather than later.
I am so proud to be the warm-up act for this incredible person. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.